Carolina Panthers. They kind of make a splash as well. Pick 8. Go with Tetaroa McMillan, wide receiver at Arizona. Consensus kind of number 1 receiver, excluding Travis Hunter. And they grab him in the top 10.
This is honestly probably one of my favorite picks of the entire first round. Everyone had them mocked getting an edge rusher. But as we'll talk about later in this draft class, they realized, which I guess some teams didn't, that this is one of the most loaded edges classes in a long time. And it's a very weak wide receiver class. So why not go with one of the, I mean, honestly, outside of Travis Hunter, probably the best wide receiver in the class in the top 10 for a receiving core that still needs dudes. I mean, this is not like they are definitely not set at receiver. They just spent a first round pick on Xavier Legette last year. He was okay his rookie year, not very consistent. He had some drop issues and things like that. They still have Adam Thielen, which, Adam Thielen, productive player, but he's getting up there, man. He doesn't have many snaps left. And then Jalen Coker, like the undrafted rookie that kind of broke out last year. Listen, like those are interesting guys, but if that's it, that's not a good receiving core. Like it's not even it's a bottom 5 receiving core. Let's be honest. But now you add T-Mac, and all of a sudden I'm looking at this group of receivers, and I'm like, okay, I like this group of receivers a lot. Now it is very dependent on T-Mac's development, but I mean,
Right.
again, like we just said, he's one of the best receivers in this class. And what it tells me as well, dude, which I love to see this as someone who's at this point, yes, I'm a Vol fan, but at this point, I'm kind of rooting for Bryce, just the comeback story and things like that, because he started his career so poorly. They believe in Bryce Young, man. They still believe in Bryce Young's development. That's immediately what this told me when they took T-Mac at 8.
Yeah, I loved it as well. I loved, I think most people agreed that Leggett was a bit of a reach at the pick last year. Um, and his skill set, everything, he just had so many question marks as a receiver, and drafting him to essentially be your wide receiver 1 just didn't feel great at the time. And it's not to like doubt the process, because you did need a wide receiver. Like no one's questioning that, but getting him where they did just didn't feel great. Now, I love the fact that they acknowledged he did not solve our problem. We
Yep.
still need a wide receiver for this team, and McMillan can be a wide receiver 1. He is good at contested catching. He's good at against single coverage. He gets open. Like he is just an all around wide. Probably the only true, again, outside of Travis Hunter, wide receiver 1 in this class. There were a lot of wide receiver 2s, but he can be your X receiver on the outside. And to your point, help your young quarterback who struggled greatly when he started, but then ended last season quietly playing incredibly well on a team that was just struggling. So I love the pick, love the process of getting Bryce Young weapons and helping. I think, looking at it from the perspective of pushing guys down the depth chart a little bit. You don't want Leggett to have to be your number 1. You don't want Thielen to have to be your number 1 at his age. Now they can bump down and play a role that better fits their skill set and age and time.
Exactly. It's kind of like we were talking about on the live show this morning with the Cowboys getting George Pickens. I agree. You push a guy like Leggett down the depth chart. Now all of a sudden, Leggett is just better in that role, and he can be more productive in the wide receiver number 2 role, which kind of seems counterproductive, but it's really not, because it opens him up with T-Mac on the field. So I absolutely loved it, dude. And like to your point, dude, this is one of the more fascinating things going into next season, Bryce Young's development, because he completely saved his career the back half of last season, dude. He looked phenomenal. You could argue the back half of last season, he was the best rookie or the best quarterback from the 2023 draft class, which is fascinating considered where Stroud started his rookie season. So I think the Panthers still believe in Bryce, and I don't blame him after the end of last season. And it just made sense to take a wide receiver in the top 10 when this edge class was loaded.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to your point, it's kind of like addition by subtraction by bumping Leggett down the depth chart, because now he's not having to go against corner 1s as much, especially teams that flip. So you are essentially adding value to your offense by subtracting something in that sense. So Yeah, it makes me excited, honestly, to watch the Panthers this next season offensively to see what Bryce Young does with these new weapons. Um, they then flip. This division had a theme. Every team seemed to double up at some point, even in like back-to-back picks like this. But they go Nick Scorton, edge out of A&M, who had some first-round hype, and then Princely Umunumalen, edge out of Ole Miss.
Nailed it, by the way.
Yeah. I again love this process of doing things like this. Slightly different skill set guys and different kind of upsides to what they can become, but love the fact that, to your point at the beginning, they needed an edge. They got mocked an edge for a reason, and then they double up with this deep edge class in the second and third.
Yeah, I listen. This is exact like their strategy worked perfectly. This was clearly their strategy coming into this draft was, hey, we're gonna go target Bryce Young, a weapon in the top 10, because this edge class we're going to be able to get productive guys. And all the rest of the class had so many question marks that why not double up like this in the second and third round, man? And I thought they got two really good players at great value as well. Like Princely was extremely productive at Ole Miss, and kind of surprised to see such a productive edge rusher go in the third round because those guys are usually gone by the end of the second round. But again, it's because like this was the most loaded edge rusher class in like it feels like in modern history, dude. I mean, it was so many good pass rushers this year. And like you said, Nick Scorton was a guy who at the during mock draft season, I was having him go to the Lions or the Eagles at the end of the first round. Like that's a guy that many people had going in the first round. And again, this is something that needs to be studied. He's also one of those guys, if you go back and look at his consensus ranking like a season ago, this was a dude that was like in the top 10 as far as like this year's draft class was concerned from a consensus perspective. So I don't know if that kind of stuff matters. Somebody needs to do a study on that, but it is intriguing getting him at 51 with, I mean, a second round pick is a decent investment, but it's not a first round pick investment. So I think they attacked edge really well in this class, man.
Yeah. And to your point, like there's the Texas A&M like fiasco with edge rushers where like when they're at A&M, they're just for some reason like worse than when they're not there because he was absolutely ridiculous at Purdue. To your point, when he transferred there, people just assumed he was going to grow off that. But and I can't remember who the other one is, but there's a guy that transferred out of A&M that then like went up in draft board his past season. So yeah, and to your point, like PFF had them at 29 and 50th on their big board, and they go at 51 and 77. So, and I think they actually traded up for both of them as well. So they traded up for both of these picks. So they acknowledged the edge need, played the board, and then was like, let's go attack before these guys come off. And again, talking about what projects well at edge, both had really good PFF at 90 plus PFF grades. So the chances they end up becoming good, and Scorton's a really good run defender as well. So at bare minimum, you get that from him. So love the process of doubling up at edge and getting two guys who will probably end up being starters on this team if I was a betting man. So
yeah, agreed. Or there'll at least be good rotational pieces. And that defensive line definitely got better after this draft, dude. No question about that.
Absolutely. So then they go running back in the fourth round and take Trevor Etienne out of Georgia. Kind of an interesting pick. They had drafted Jonathan Brooks last season, who had, an unfortunate knee injury after having an injury the season before at Texas. So haven't really been able to even see him, but he was a second round pick last season and for a good reason. So they add some depth there after signing Rico Dowdle to try to have some more security behind Chuba Hubbard. And then they go Lathan Ransom, safety at Ohio State in the fourth round as well. So 2 fourth round picks there.
Yeah, I thought those are two solid picks. The ETN was a little interesting just because I thought there was probably better running backs on the board, if I'm being honest. But the Ransom pick I really like. This is a guy that I think could end up starting for them in the fourth round, which would be incredible. I thought he was a solid player at Ohio State. So yeah, liked those picks. I thought the running back pick was a little bit interesting, but not much to complain about. They honestly had a really solid draft. So
Yeah, 18's interesting because he's kind of on and off the field a bit, so he has a little bit of health issues, but he'd also pretty good at forcing missed tackles. So that's always something you want to see from a running back. Then they go one of the other big defensive tackles from Florida. They go Cam Jackson, 6'6", 328-pound guy, just typical nose tackle type guy. Not a great athlete, probably not going to make an impact pass rushing, but can be a solid run defender. And then two interesting picks to close out in the 5th and 6th with Mitchell Evans, tight end out of Notre Dame. Usually feel pretty good, like Iowa, taking a
Yeah.
tight end from Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Wasn't like overly productive while there, but a guy that always just seemed to be pretty solid. And then a very interesting pick in Jimmy Horn Jr. Kind of I'd say underrated is a good word to use for wide receiver that was also at Colorado alongside Travis Hunter.
Yeah, I agree. I thought Jimmy Horn was a little bit underrated. It's also interesting on our lands. Jimmy Horn Jr. is projected to be the punt returner and the kick returner for the
Interesting.
Panthers, which is kind of interesting there. And then, yeah, Mitchell Evans in the 5th round. I think he could compete to get tight end reps. I really believe that. So, really good contested catch player. So he could be yet another solid weapon for Bryce in the offense, man. And so could Jimmy Horn. Although, just looking at the Hourlands thing, it looks like he might be more of a special teamer. But you never know with this Panthers wide receiving core. He could find his way onto the offense at some point. So
That's the thing. You add the depth there, and then with a room that's not the best, you add a little bit of opportunity for some competition there. So love that, and love the depth with Mitchell Evans to pair him alongside Tommy Tremble and Jatavian Sanders from last season. So from a UDFA perspective, they had one interesting pickup in Ethan Garbers, UCLA's QB, another one of those quarterbacks that was kind of on the fringe of whether or not they'd get drafted or not. So add a young guy to come compete potentially to be, the backup to Bryce Young. Other than that, none of these names stand out too much to me. Musa Muhammad from A&M was pretty solid at points. I remember when we played them, seeing him.
they also just
So
brought
yeah,
in a lot of players. I mean, they
they
brought in
did.
a ton of guys. So I'm sure some of these guys will probably make the 53.
Yeah, and some special teamers like you mentioned, Jimmy Horn as well. All right, I think I already know your answer here. But what was your favorite pick for the Panthers?
I'm gonna go the first rounder, man. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
T Mac. I think it was one of the bigger surprises in the top 10 just because so many people mocked them edge. But I think they made the right decision, man. I think Bryce Young needs a guy that can kind of bring him over the hump a little bit and maybe get him closer to that elite level in the NFL. And it's going to be interesting now, man. That's going to be one of the more fascinating stories in the NFL, seeing how Bryce develops and, how T Mac helps him develop.
I'm gonna cheat, so I'm just gonna clump both of them into one and just say the edges.
I like it.
I'm just gonna say doubling up at edge, back-to-back picks with Scorton and Namoon Milan. I think they knew they had an issue there, and they didn't. They took T-Mac. They took who was probably the best player on their board, and didn't force edge in the first round and come back and attack it with those two picks, trading up for it. Didn't have to give up too much capital. Still had, 8 picks in this class. So love that process and those two edges. One quick thing I will note is that I'm surprised. We've touched on this with some other teams. I'm only intrigued by the fact they didn't take any offensive linemen. They did
Hmm.
sign some, but with an offensive line that has not been the best, I'm a little shocked that they didn't use some of this capital with 8 picks on some depth along the O line.
That is true. You do. I mean, typically, even teams with good offensive lines take
Yeah.
offensive linemen. So that is kind of interesting how they didn't take a single lineman.
Well, with that in mind, what was the consensus for the Panthers draft?
Tied 11th with the Falcons, or excuse me, the
Ah,
Bucks. So yeah, I think that's right too. I mean, there's also some teams. Well, I don't know, man. There's so many good draft classes. Like to your point, this class for the Panthers is probably like a top 5 class 5 to 10 years ago. I mean, they absolutely nailed it, man. And they got some very impactful players at incredibly impactful positions. So I think this could be a draft that potentially helps the Panthers compete for the NFC South.
yeah, I love that the way you phrase that because this is the type that can help the entire team and franchise take a step forward. Assuming that Bryce continues to develop like he did. So, All right, that is the Panthers 2025 class.